Now, following its passage by Parliament in April of 2024, the Green Connection is sounding the alarm about the draft regulations in the Upstream Petroleum Resources Development Act, currently under review by the Department of Mineral and Petroleum Resources. The Eco-Justice Organization warns that the draft regulations could erode democratic participation and may sideline affected communities and could accelerate environmental harm. Legal advisor at the Green Connection, Shahil Singh, joins us for more. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. You've expressed concerns about the draft regulations, warning that they could erode democratic participation. How will communities be affected?
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me. So in the submission that we had made to the department, we focused on 4 sections in particular. So those were issues of public participation, they were issues of climate change, they were issues of protecting our oceans, and protecting small-scale fishing communities. So the regulations appear to have many deficiencies that could severely hamper the public participation process, and that could severely affect citizens as a whole.
So where do the regulations fall short as you scrutinize the finer detail?
So for instance, when it comes to matters of public participation, if we look in the definitions of the regulations, in particular, if we look at how the regulations define interested and affected parties, so it says that if there's going to be a proposal for a particular project, interested and affected parties must be consulted, but the definition of interested and affected parties is very narrow, and it defines them as being somebody with a direct interest or who may be affected by the operation. Now, this can become quite problematic because it could exclude many people or legitimate stakeholders. Organizations like our own, being environmental organizations or community groups from adjacent areas who aren't directly impacted by a particular project, or even just concerned citizens who are concerned about the environment and its impact on climate change. All of these people could potentially be excluded from the consultation process. And even in terms of, for instance, the Constitution, Section 24 in particular, guarantees that everyone has the right to have an environment that's protected. And it also goes against many of the principles in NEMA, which is known as the National Environmental Management Act, which is a key piece of legislation that governs many aspects of processes regarding exploration for things like oil and gas.
So how then should the definition of who qualifies as an interested and affected party be broadened to ensure that it does not silence those whose voices really should matter?
It should definitely be broadened in a way that anyone who is affected or could potentially be affected should be able to raise concerns, even if they don't have a direct interest or are directly affected by a proposed project. So it needs to be broadened in that sense to include more people, because in South Africa, we don't operate in silos of isolation. So just because something's not affecting you directly, you should still be able to still bring it up. So it should be broadened to not exclude people in that regard.
So in your letter to the Department of Mineral and Petroleum Resources, what is the center of your concerns and what are you hoping to see shift?
So the center of our concerns are essentially the way in which the regulations need to interact with people as a whole. So, for instance, one of the pieces of the draft regulations that we find particularly problematic is found in Regulation 37, subsection 6, to be more specific. So this requires anyone who wants to appeal an administrative decision to pay a fee to appeal such decision. This is highly problematic because as South Africans, we come from a history of oppression and silencing of voices. And as such, nobody should have to pay a fee to have their voice heard. This is directly against the Constitution, which guarantees that everyone has the right to administrative action that's lawful, reasonable, and procedurally fair. So, by doing this, it basically ensures that you can only have your voice heard if you're able to pay a fee. So, I'm not quite sure how much the fee would be, but even if it was 1 cent, that's too much because nobody should have to pay a fee to have their voices heard. So, it's things like those that need to be changed, so it doesn't limit the way in which people can interact with decisions that could affect their livelihoods and, just their lives as a whole.
And have you had any reactions since you've written that letter?
So we've had an acknowledgement of receipt from the department, but the date for submissions just closed last week on the 26th, I believe. So we haven't received any direct responses yet, but I'm sure the department is busy analyzing all of the submissions that they would have received.
Very well. Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. Legal advisor at the Green Connection, Shahil Singh, joining us there.